Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's discussion. We are here for the release of this very interesting report on Bay of Bengal security. It's called Stable Seas Security in the Bay of Bengal. It's been produced under the aegis of Stable Seas, which is a non-profit research organization focused on maritime security, in partnership with the UNODC, which is the UN Office for Drugs and Crime, and of course the ORF, the Observer Research Foundation. We have with us today the lead author of the report, Jay Benson. Welcome, Jay. And I would also, for the record, like to welcome Pernille Rasmussen, who is the program officer at the UNODC in the office in Colombo, for helping us put this report together, rather helping us organize this web discussion. We'd actually planned to do this a few weeks earlier. Sometimes in March, but it really couldn't happen because of COVID. But it's just as well that we are doing this now. We've shared a copy of the report to all of you. I hope some of you have had a chance to take a look. It's an excellent report, looks at myriad dimensions of security and stability in the Indian Ocean. Let me also welcome Commodore Abhijit Singh, the president of the India Maritime Foundation, a keen commentator on maritime security, and Pooja Bhatt. Pooja is with the Center for Air Power Studies. She's a leading analyst on maritime security, has just released a book on security in the South China Sea. Welcome, Pooja. Welcome to all of you. The Bay of Bengal, of course, I just sort of as my preliminary comments, just say that is a popular theme of discussion among Indian maritime analysts. And a lot of us have tended to look at it from really a balance of power lens, of course, and a connectivity integration lens as part of Act East. But really, what's animated our analysis is really China's presence in these waters and what it's tried to do with the countries in the region. This report actually steps back from all of that, and I was very happy to see that it actually takes a very tactical, realistic look at the non-traditional security issues in the area, and that's just as well. And Jay will be saying more about that in a few minutes. The first order of business for me today is actually to invite Mr. Masatomo Yamaguchi, who's the program coordinator for the UNODC in the Indian Ocean East team. So I'd invite him to say a few words. But let me, before that, just make one little announcement. We are happy to have all of you join us for the discussion today. And while we'd actually like some of you to sort of make interventions during the Q&A, but I think for lack of time, we would keep this to questions posed in the in either the Q&A tab or the chat box which is there, and that's how we'd like to do this. But if you absolutely need to sort of make a comment or an intervention, to indicate to me, raise your hands. And can I first request you to unveil a copy of the report and show us what it looks like before I invite you to say a few words, because this is actually a release of the report.
Sure. So here's the report here.
Okay, that's very nice. That's very nice.
For those who received it as a PDF, you probably don't realize the heft as a physical document. So yeah, we're very excited to have it out, and very excited to speak with everyone here today about it. Would you like me to go forward and present a little bit on the findings?
Yeah, yes, Jay, can I just ask you to hold for half a minute? If we have Mr. Masatomo representing the UNODC, would you like to say a few words, sir?
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh.
Yes, yeah. Please go ahead, sir. Make your remarks.
Sure. Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Masatomo Yamaguchi. I'm a program coordinator for Indian Ocean East of UNODC Global Maritime Crime Program. Our mission as a Global Maritime Program, GMCP, is to improve capacity and the capability of member states' criminal justice system to effectively prevent, investigate, and prosecute maritime crimes within a sound rule of law framework and through fostering international cooperation. GMCP operates globally with 7 regional teams. Based in Colombo, Sri Lanka, our Indian Ocean East team covers South Asia region. mainly focusing on Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Maldives, and Seychelles. GMCP is very proud of having been involved in this report on Bay of Bengal. The region is greatly affected by illicit crime activities, such as trafficking wildlife, drugs, and weapons, not to mention IIU fishing. It's also suffering from irregular migration and human trafficking due to political instability recently. But at the same time, the maritime space has immense opportunity and potential. We, as a GMCP, would like to congratulate the work of the work has been done by the OEF, and the launching of this report, which capture these challenge of maritime crime in the region very comprehensively, is very timely and also important event. We have been looking forwarding to this launching and also to further discussion that will follow. The last but not least, we also would like to thank ORA for supporting this report and also hosting this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Jay, can I now ask you to make your presentation, after which you will have the discussant speak? Jay, the floor is yours.
Yes. Just share my screen here. Great. So thank you all very much for being here today. Thank you as well to Mr. Masamoto for those comments, and Abhijit Singh and Observer Research Foundation for hosting this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to speak with all of you. My name is Jay Benson, and I'm the Indo-Pacific Project Manager for Stable Seas. As you likely know, I'm here today to discuss the findings of a recent report developed in partnership with ORF and the Global Maritime Crime Program of UNODC on maritime security in the Bay of Bengal. I'm going to keep my presentation fairly brief because I think we're all likely to get the most out of this event if we can move relatively quickly to an open conversation. I'll start with just a brief bit of background. Stable Seas is a nonprofit research organization which engages international stakeholders in the maritime community with novel research on maritime security issues. We take a comprehensive approach that includes research largely on the 9 issue areas impacting maritime security that you see here. These include threats to maritime security, such as piracy and armed robbery and illicit maritime trades, as well as mitigating factors like maritime enforcement capacity and the sustainable development of the blue economy. By taking a holistic view of these interrelated issues, we hope to develop a more comprehensive understanding of maritime security dynamics for our stakeholders. Our work includes the development of a maritime security index, which measures and maps these 9 issues across a wide geography, regional reports like the one we are discussing here today, as well as more fine-grained technical assistance to international maritime stakeholders. So, why the Bay of Bengal? Why did we choose to focus on this geography for the report? Well, the report covers the 9 issue areas previously mentioned across 5 states in the Bay of Bengal region: Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Thailand. We feel that a report focused on maritime security in the Bay of Bengal is important and timely for 3 reasons. The first is the region's sheer demographic weight. Roughly 1 in 5 people on Earth live in states bordering the Bay of Bengal, and the area includes some of the world's fastest growing economies. Maritime security and governance will be a key factor in ensuring that this growth trajectory is maintained and the region's development potential is realized. In addition, the region is an area of increasing geopolitical importance. More and more external actors are recognizing the economic potential and the strategic geography of the region. As a result, more maritime security stakeholders from across the globe are taking sharper interest and increasing their presence in the region. And finally, the Bay of Bengal is an arena of growing regional cooperation and policy focus on maritime issues. This makes research which highlights the challenges and opportunities in the maritime domain all the more important for helping to inform policy formation on maritime issues at both the national and multilateral level. So, turning to the report itself, I thought it might be beneficial to look primarily at the most pressing maritime security challenges in the region, the opportunities the maritime domain presents, and then finally the potential areas of policy prioritization for improving regional maritime security. Looking first at the region's most pressing maritime security challenges, you see here that we highlight three areas. Those include fisheries, illicit maritime trades, and maritime mixed migration. Looking first at fisheries, fisheries play a critical role in ensuring food security and welfare for coastal communities across the Bay. However, when looking at fisheries health in the Bay, a few important challenges arise. These include pollution from coastal areas, as well as the massive watersheds of the several major rivers which drain into the Bay, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing practices, which cost the region up to $10 billion annually, and the need for strengthened cooperative regional fisheries management in order to best manage this inherently transnational resource. The second major challenge I'd like to highlight is that posed by illicit maritime trades. For many illicitly traded products, the Bay of Bengal is primarily a transit region rather than a source or a destination market. This seems to be the case for illicit goods such as wildlife, illegal wildlife products, and heroin. However, there are several other trades whose production and consumption are more closely ingrained in the region. For example, the maritime trade and contraband between India and Sri Lanka. Illegal agricultural chemicals from India flow to Sri Lanka via the maritime space. And in the opposite direction, gold imported to Sri Lanka because of its relatively low import duties flows back to India. Another example is the emergence of Myanmar as a major production center for synthetic drugs, including methamphetamine and the local derivative yaba. These synthetic drugs are then trafficked via the maritime space to destinations outside the region, as well as going to feed a growing local demand in Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Thailand. It's important to note that many of these maritime trades in illicit goods are facilitated by the use of fishing vessels. The sheer number of small fishing vessels active in the Bay and the difficulty in monitoring their activities provides a degree of anonymity. Developing more systemic means of identifying potential suspicious behavior from these smaller vessels could have significant impacts on counter-trafficking efforts. And the final challenge I'd like to highlight is that of maritime mixed migration. In recent years, the region has really seen a crisis in maritime mixed migration. And this is an issue that has a variety of causes. There are economic migrants, primarily from Bangladesh, seeking employment in Southeast Asian economies. There are also those driven by conflict and persecution, including the large Rohingya population, which has fled waves of ethnic violence in Myanmar, settled in camps in southeastern Bangladesh, and now many are looking for a more sustainable livelihood by pursuing a second dangerous maritime migration to places like Malaysia and Indonesia. And while not yet a significant factor, there is also the risk in the not too distant future, given the region's high climate vulnerability, that climate change could spur large-scale displacement, leading to significant maritime mixed migration. But what's really important to note about maritime mixed migration is that regardless of the initial motive for migration, or whether that started out as trafficking or smuggling, all irregular maritime migrants in the region are highly vulnerable to abuse and exploitation in various forms. What may begin as a voluntary migration can easily end in violence, extortion, forced labor, and human trafficking. In order to address the dangers faced by these migrants, states will need to develop responses with a stronger emphasis on migrant protection and welfare, as well as the development of alternative legal pathways for migration. So, turning then from the security challenges, there are also very significant reasons for optimism when it comes to maritime security in the Bay of Bengal. Two areas really stand out here as opportunities to be built upon. The first is the immense potential of the blue economy in the region. Fisheries, shipping, offshore hydrocarbons, and tourism all play a significant role in regional economies. Shipping and coastal tourism in particular, if well governed, have the potential to be expanded significantly in the region as a source of sustainable growth. What's more, blue economic development seems to have increased in importance as a policy priority for governments across the region in recent years. Bangladesh, for example, has convened multiple meetings on the blue economy concept and pushed for greater blue economic cooperation in regional forums. India has demonstrated its commitment to the blue economy through the Sagarmala investment program, which focuses heavily on the development of shipping and port infrastructure. And really across the region, we see states placing a greater emphasis and policy priority on the role the maritime space can play in national development. And the second reason for optimism I'd like to highlight is the role of international and regional cooperation on maritime issues in the Bay of Bengal. At a bilateral level, cooperation on maritime issues appears quite strong. Remaining territorial disputes in the region have been resolved in recent years via international mediation, and there are several quite strong bilateral maritime security capacity building partnerships in the region as well. And these cooperative bilateral relationships really create a facilitating environment for increased multilateral cooperation on maritime issues in the region. BIMSTEC, for example, is an ideal forum for furthering this multilateral maritime cooperation. And in recent years, member states appear to have placed increased political will behind the success of BIMSTEC. However, BIMSTEC also suffers from a significant gap between its potential as a forum for maritime cooperation in the region and the resourcing necessary to fulfill that role. All of these issues are ample reason for optimism about the future of the Bay of Bengal and as a secure and prosperous maritime space. And while serious challenges remain, the region is on a strong footing to address those in a coordinated manner and capitalize on shared opportunities in the maritime space. So, looking then to the future, one of the important messages we'd like to emphasize with this report is the need to approach all of these diverse components of maritime security holistically. There are strong relationships between many of these issues, and as such, progress in one issue area is often largely dependent on developments in another. And while these complex relationships make the task facing the maritime security community challenging, they also present opportunities. By identifying a few key policy priorities that have impacts across issue areas, resources can be utilized to greater impact, and broad progress can be made across a variety of issue areas. Given the research we've done, we'd like to highlight 3 potential areas of policy prioritization for consideration. The first is regional ports. One of the key factors that will impact across maritime security issues in the region is the capacity, governance, and security of regional ports. Future port development and regulation has both economic and security impacts. On the economic side, current capacity and efficiency issues in many ports hamper the regional development of shipping and trade. But these same issues also create security concerns, as long waits at anchorages facilitate armed robbery, and in some places, port corruption facilitates illicit maritime trades. Addressing these issues requires investment in port infrastructure and modern port management systems that can make ports more efficient and help mitigate both these economic and security concerns. In addition, maritime domain awareness will be critical. Maritime domain awareness, or MDA, is critical to understanding emerging maritime threats, as well as to the ability to respond to the various forms of maritime crime we've already discussed. And while improvement in this area has been significant, gaps in regional MDA capacity still remain. The first is the gap between states within the region. While India has a fairly robust MDA system, some other states in the region lack those same resources. This could be addressed through further maritime security capacity building from both partners inside and outside the region, as well as increased information sharing. In that regard, the establishment of the International Fusion Center Indian Ocean region just outside Delhi is a major landmark to be built upon. The second MDA gap for the region is in regards to what I previously mentioned with small vessels. As previously noted, small vessels are extremely difficult to monitor and are thus exploited for various forms of maritime crime. Systems for small vessel monitoring, in addition to developing relationships with and reporting platforms for civilians in the maritime space and in coastal communities, will be critical in helping to address this gap. And the final area for policy prioritization we'd like to suggest is the further strengthening of multilateral maritime cooperation within the region. The further development of BIMSTEC could have impacts across a variety of maritime security issues. The organization is perhaps best placed to facilitate such cooperation and improve maritime security in the Bay of Bengal, given its geography, the importance it's already placed on maritime issues, and the increased prioritization it has received from member states in recent years. However, its potential as a platform for regional maritime cooperation is curtailed by its current lack of resources. Even relatively modest investments in financial and human resources available to the BIMSTEC Secretariat would have outsized impacts in enhancing the organization's capacity to really drive substantive cooperation and action across a variety of maritime security issues. We hope that this report is just a first step towards more research on maritime security in the broader region. We're developing a variety of follow-on research concepts now, including focusing on how violent non-state actors use the maritime space, the development of maritime domain awareness, regional port security, and a variety of others. But we'd always like that work to be informed by the needs of the international maritime community. So we'd love to know more about what you feel are the most pressing security interests in the region, what needs to be done to address them, and how we can best support that work. So I'm eager to hear from all of you shortly. Additionally, if you have thoughts about how stable seas can be of support, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. Thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate the opportunity. I hope that this can serve as a good jumping off point for a productive conversation about all these issues.
Thank you, Jay. That was a very comprehensive overview of security in the Bay of Bengal. I would say that there's been some very interesting themes that you have highlighted: capacity building, maritime domain awareness, creating an integrated space. And I'm sure during the Q&A, these are some of the areas that we're going to have a more focused discussion on. But for the moment, can I invite Commodore AJ to make his remarks?
Thank you, Abhijit. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm obviously delighted to be here this morning at this ORF event being conducted in the new normal of COVID times. And Abhijit, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in the discussion on this Bay of Bengal report. Jay, that was an absolutely wonderful overview. It gave us an extremely comprehensive understanding of what exactly the Bay of Bengal report was all about and how it seeks to address all the challenges that have been faced in the region. And for that, I'd like to congratulate you and your team of authors for this for highlighting all the multi-layered and multi-dimensional complexities and challenges that this region presents. None of these, what actually emerges in your report, and what I liked was the chapterization commencing with the blue economy, because the blue economy basically underlines the importance of sustainable development, which is absolutely integral to the development of this region, and how all these non-traditional threats which follow in your subsequent chapters are going to impact this if not addressed properly. And what I think also comes out very clearly in all the chapters is none of these are mutually exclusive of the other. So it's, as you brought out in your conclusion, a very holistic approach is to be taken, and it cannot be taken in bits and pieces and piecemeal methods. It has to be looked at as a very comprehensive sort of holistic approach to addressing this challenge. Nations will have to prioritize and devote enough time and attention to this. There is no doubt that the Bay of Bengal region is rife with challenges and opportunities, as you brought out. It has the potential to become a model of sustainable maritime development for the nations constituting the greater Bay of Bengal region, the 5 nations that you highlighted in your report. Not only, I still feel it's not only the 5 nations, though you did say that countries like Indonesia, the Bay of Bengal is not a priority area for them. But I think it still will impact countries like Indonesia. From a security perspective, you would probably recall that when Aceh was an area of internal insurgency in Indonesia, we in India were quite concerned because it's only less than 90 nautical miles from the southernmost tip of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and could very well have impacted our security issues in that part of the world. So it's not that we can isolate any of the maritime neighbors of the Bay of Bengal region also. So it's going to impact them as well. I think the report accords due recognition to a region that unfortunately for some reason has been in the shadows for too long. Perhaps there have been other sort of geopolitical flashpoints in the region which have dominated the narrative. But any region which accounts for 20% of the world's population cannot be ignored. So it's good that this report highlights the importance of this region and how it can impact not only the region itself, but in the larger global sort of perspective, or the regional perspective of the Indo-Pacific. Hopefully this has now been recognized to some extent. In the last couple of years, there have been numerous multi-sectoral initiatives that have been discussed at various levels. They've been through conferences, seminars, workshops, and even summit meetings, most of which have included these 5 nations and also Nepal and Bhutan, even though they are landlocked under the aegis of BIMSTEC. In fact, BIMSTEC perhaps is the only multilateral institutionalized mechanism addressing this region as a whole. BIMSTEC itself, as you brought out, though established in 1994, took 17 years for its secretariat to be set up, which even now people say is understaffed and under-resourced. But I think it got a shot in the arm when Prime Minister Modi took the initiative of inviting the heads of government for his inauguration in May 2019. And I think India, to a certain extent, has recognized the importance of BIMSTEC now as part of its larger Act East policy. How much of this can actually translate into substance? Only time will tell. I mean, whether it's just optics or it's actually substantial, we really can't predict at this point of time. So, but there have been a flurry of multi-sectoral activities recommending the way ahead. Hopefully, these will translate into action and initiate the process of revitalizing the cohesive and inclusive development of this region. Well, I've been strictly instructed by Abhijit not to cross the allotted time of 10 minutes. So I will probably err on the side of caution and maybe less. But I will not go into details of the report. We already read what contained in the report. You've given us a fantastic overview. It's extremely well articulated and leaves little one can add, except to agree with it in most part to what it says. But I will instead focus on a couple of other security-related developmental issues which could shape the future of this region. Firstly, one of the reasons this region never got the attention it deserved was because of the less than cordial relationships amongst its own members or amongst these 5 countries themselves. Till not so long ago, till about a decade ago, India, for one, had little time for the military junta in Myanmar. Our relationship with Bangladesh seesawed to and fro depending on the political dispensation in that country. India and Sri Lanka have been very cordial for the most part, but there have been issues which we've been at odds with each other on that. So when there was this internally amongst various other countries, they've had their own issues, as you highlighted, the migrant problem, the Rohingya crisis, maritime disputes, which fortunately have got settled cordially. And in fact, now the India-Bangladesh maritime dispute is quoted as an example. Whenever any UNCLOS PCA ruling is discussed, this is quoted as a shining example of a larger country conceding space to a smaller country, particularly in light of the China-Philippines spat that took place. So I think from that perspective, there is a definite improvement. Countries have started looking beyond their internal conflict issues, which will prevail. They've got these are political flashpoints, but they are looking at the larger external geopolitical picture. And also, I think what they have started recognizing is this region is prone to a lot of natural and man-made calamities. So we have to address that as well. And I think from that perspective, India as the leading country in the region, in that 3.7 trillion total economic GDP of this region, I think 2.7 trillion is probably India's alone. So India has a leading role to play, which India has recognized, and as the first responder has been able to sort of establish its credibility as wanting to take this whole initiative forward. Coming then to the other thing which I wanted to bring out was, if you notice, the other good thing that's happening in this region is that they're growing out of their internal troubles. And as you brought out in your report yourself, the GDP and HDI figures of the nations in this region are ahead of the global curve. So that's another very positive development, because these were the issues which stymied growth in these countries. A poor HDI index, poor GDP, not a very good sort of distribution of wealth, etc. So these were areas of socio-economic strife. The other interesting aspect that you brought out is that most of the East Indian states coastal states on India's eastern seaboard are not BJP ruled. So they are led by opposition parties. However, there is one thing that has been characteristic of India, that notwithstanding the dispensation of the center or the leanings, there has been a certain consistency in India's foreign policy. So while we had a look east became act east. It wasn't that do away with look east and come up with something new. So it has been incremental. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that these are not BJP ruled states, I don't think when it comes to the larger picture, this is going to be a factor which is going to be detrimental to the development of this region. States like Odisha have done stellar work in the coastal domain, and they are getting recognized for it by the center also. Unfortunately, the federalist sort of nature of India's political spectrum, which was meant to be a force multiplier, is actually, getting a little bit of negativity now. You can see a little negativity. It's almost as if an opposition ruled state is meant to differ with the center and vice versa. So we've seen that in West Bengal, there have been times in certain initiatives that the Indian central government wanted to take with Bangladesh have been stymied by the West Bengal government. Similarly, there have been times when on Tamil issues, Tamil Nadu has been at odds with India's stand with Sri Lanka. So these are issues which I think are not really going to be game changers, but they have their own frictions and tensions which they cause, and probably leads to the center having to accommodate these to a certain extent, which may not be in the larger interests of the country or its foreign policy. The report also makes a mention of India's ambitious port-led program Sagarmala, which you alluded to as well. This program has great potential, to create a very sustainable maritime ecosystem of growth for the entire region, particularly for the movement of commerce, as we've seen movement of commerce now between Bangladesh and India happening on the coastal route, Indian waterways being developed in India, etc. Perhaps the report could have, given us a little more details on how successful has this program been in the last 5 years, and how can it be better leveraged for the region as a whole. What more should India do, or the countries do, to take Sagarmala into a larger sort of Bay of Bengal perspective, including Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's got Colombo, which is the 7th largest transshipment port in the world. How can India sort of leverage that? You have made a mention of it, but under the aegis of Sagarmala, how can it be sort of enhanced? Also, the comparison, though brief, of the Sagarmala with the Maritime Silk Road raises questions about the external security dimension. The BRI is by far the most ambitious maritime connectivity and infrastructure development program the world has ever seen. Over 150 countries have signed on to it. And even in the Bay of Bengal region, other than India, all the other countries are signatories to it. As Xi Jinping's dream project, he's not going to accept any compromise or he will not accept any compromise with this program. In fact, I very sincerely believe, and I highlight this very often, that this program is less to do with commerce, but has very deep strategic underpinnings and is part of China's Mahanian approach to become the global numero uno through its maritime power. And each of the Bay of Bengal countries that you referred to, their stake in the BRI is considerable from a perspective of Chinese support. Hambantota has become a sore point with Sri Lanka. They've given a frigate. China has given a frigate and will possibly be giving submarines to Thailand. 2 submarines have already been given to Bangladesh. A submarine building facility is being created. And China has had a deep engagement in Myanmar for many, many years, even though we see a little bit of pushback from Myanmar. I won't call it a pushback, but it is probably not, it doesn't have the same intensity it had a few years ago, which India seems to be wanting to occupy that little space that has been created. So all these things will not sort of, take away the fact that they are going to eventually, China is going to try and make inroads into the Bay of Bengal. And how well can India cope with that will be the million-dollar question.
Can I ask you to wind up, because we've got...
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, half a minute? Half a minute then.
Yes, sir.
So I think what I was trying to say was that we also have a concept called SAGAR, which is security and growth for all in the region. So how can we leverage that better? I know we've included Bangladesh into our coastal security network. We are offering, media reports say we are offering a submarine to Myanmar. So we are trying to do our bit, but we obviously can't match China's economic or military clout. So what is it that India should do in this region to sort of counter that with certain other initiatives, perhaps some soft power initiatives, some smart power initiatives, etc. So that is something also which I think in the overall Bay of Bengal project will have to be seen as a factor. Finally, of course, I've tried not to make any mention so far of the current COVID crisis. This is going to be a game changer. None of us know how this is going to pan out and how this is going to affect economies and people in the future. So that is something I think we'll have to wait and watch and adapt. India has taken the initiative in SAARC. We've created the SAARC fund. Bangladesh has helped in that. So we are taking, this area is taking baby steps in this direction, but as it evolves, we'll come to know. So finally, I'd just like to congratulate all of you, the authors and yourself, for this extremely comprehensive report. It's highlighted all the current and emerging issues in the Bay of Bengal. And I'm sure this should become a reference document for many governments to see how to take the Bay of Bengal initiative further as a cohesive whole, rather than in bits and pieces. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for very interesting, probing and relevant remarks. Pooja, can I turn to you? Please make your remarks, and please keep it to 8 to 10 minutes if you don't mind. Yeah, you need to put your mic on, Pooja.
Sorry. Yeah, hi, good morning. It's indeed a pleasure to be here at ORF and talking on this project. Thank you, Abhijit sir, for having me for this talk. First of all, I would like to congratulate the entire team of Jay and the contributors of this project. It's indeed a very pithy report that you have come out with. I've been following work of Stable Seas project since they came out with the Gulf of Guinea and Somalian water project. So I was expecting something of this sort coming out soon. I'm glad it's happened. So as I've already told, and it has been discussed already, that a lot of issues have been covered, a lot of ground, or in this case, a lot of water has been covered in this report about these 5 Bay of Bengal countries, and the 9 issues of maritime security and governance have been covered. So I will not go into the details of the thing because you have put a lot of hard work to put numbers to these issues. So I think this makes a very good groundwork report for all of us to follow. However, what I will try is to discuss how we can take this project to a next level by giving up some ideas at 3 different levels which come to me. That would be, first would be sub-regional, regional, and at international, and how we can, because they are interconnected issues, so how they can impact each other and how this project can take up these issues and work further for the development of Bay of Bengal. So given that fact, you have provided a pithy report about wide-ranging issues and relevant issues of maritime security. What strikes out most importantly is all these countries in the Bay of Bengal that you mentioned have one thing in particular, that unlike the rest of the world in the global north and otherwise, the coastal countries or the coastal states are the ones who are most economically developed for the trade reasons. However, these are the countries, they're not just economically backward, but they're also made complicated with their own ethnic and political and issues, internal domestic issues. So despite being a place for development, this area has remained quite underdeveloped, and this has come out in your report issue after issue, and every theme that you have discussed, all the 9 themes that have that discuss these issues quite in detail. So first of all, that's why I will go to the regional component of it, that how these low-income economies who are politically unstable, quite not capable of taking, building up their own infrastructure, can come up together. BIMSTEC, as HSR and you also mentioned, has been a good vehicle to bring up these countries together and for the development of the issues, but BIMSTEC has its own issues in itself. It is more economically oriented. The maritime security in terms of traditional, non-traditional security has its limited role for BIMSTEC. Apart from that, IORA and IFC, IOR has not been quite successful in capturing these issues of economic development. So my point here is how these bodies can help together in bringing up together the transcending the issues of political instability, if I may call, between the countries, and the issues of HDI, issues of low GDP. How these can work together to build up these issues would be the first problem that we'll face at sub-regional level. Second would be the issue of ports. That would be at regional level, that you also brought. That issue of ports is not just for the trade, but it has also come over the time becoming a traditional threat issue. There is the issue of how these ports will help these countries again for their economic development. Will these exacerbate the problems of economic development? Because a lot of finance that or economics that the money that is coming from the other countries, namely China and all, are they actually trickling down to the lower levels of economic development in these countries is one of the problems, one of the questions that we need to see. Another is military security issue that HSR also mentioned, that how this area, Bay of Bengal per se, is becoming a difficult area in terms of military security. It's in the middle of Indo-Pacific. So we are seeing increasing military presence in the region, and how this will affect the economic development of the region, because if the region remains militarily unstable, it will impact the economic development of the region as well. So port, as it is, has its dual role. So which way we will go would be another issue in terms of port, whether it will lead to political development, economic development, or military confrontation in the region will affect the development of Bay of Bengal as well. Third would be, and most importantly, which I think the report has given a lip service, but I think can be thought about in more detail, is how these countries, which are more their political infrastructure systems are not strong enough to take care of themselves, can work with the existing regional and international regimes present and draw their experiences and to develop their own internal and regional systems. Two of them can come on the top of my head. Would be Port States Measures Act, is PSMA, which is about illegal fishing, and it is a 2009 regime. Since 2009, it's in picture, and surprisingly, despite Bay of Bengal remaining a point of IUU fishing, but all these countries have the problem of IUU fishing. None of these countries are a part of PSMA. None of them are a party member to PSMA. Given the fact PSMA not only provides the member state with the technical know-how of how to tackle with the IUU fishing, it also provides with the necessary funding and necessary training to the local people to tackle the IUU fishing. So in that case, it's just not tackling IUU fishing, but with the trained manpower, these countries can also look into the another issues of illicit trafficking, piracy, and other maritime threats that they face. So I think one point that countries can think in the region of Bay of Bengal is how these countries can be a part of PSMA, the Port States Measures Act, 2009. Second is why this region, and this question keeps coming to me again and again, that we are not a part of any regional fisheries management organization. We do have Indian Ocean Tuna Association that I understand, IOTA, but this is effective till only a point. So we have issues of, again, illegal fisheries and issues related to that. Being a part of a RFMO or the sub-regional RFMO can, tackle the issue of illegal fishing and related problems as well. As you have also mentioned that coastal communities are very much dependent upon fisheries for the economy and the food. I think being a part of RFMO or building a sub-regional RFMO can also bring solution to that. So I think these two would be two good international treaties or regimes which these countries in the Bay of Bengal can think of adopting at their regional level in their own modified form, so that they can come together and build a cooperative mechanism at the regional level. Apart from that, I think the report has given the problem with the report, which I thought I'd just bring about, that IUU fishing has been given a very cursory look, which I think can be given, which I also mentioned in the previous, how ESMA and can tackle. IUU fishing, the nature of IUU fishing is changing in the region. It's not just the regional countries that are doing IUU fishing, but extra regional countries also. So I think the report can expand to bring IUU fishing in a bigger way, and to include that the nature of IUU fishing has also been evolving in terms of the kind of vessels that being used, the methods that have been used, because that will help in countries to develop their addressing the issues accordingly. So these would be the three levels of areas that I would want to discuss on this.
Thank you.
Apart from that, congratulations for the report, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was very pithy, comprehensive, but very easy to read. So so everyone who is interested in maritime issues should be able to read and should read the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja, for very, very interesting remarks. And a lot of issues you point out, I'm sure are going to come up for discussion. I already have actually some very interesting questions that have been posed already in the chat box, and I will come to each one of them. But let me use my chair's prerogative, Jay, to sort of raise the first set of issues which I want you to address and comment on. You know, inherent in the comments by both the discussants, Commodore AJ and Pooja, are actually two issues that that are of concern. One is that is there an inherent sort of tension in the Bay of Bengal between geopolitics and geoeconomics? Meaning we're willing to integrate economically, you know, we're talking a big game about, you know, Act East, the fact that, you know, this is one integrated space, we're trying to get BIMSTEC initiatives going. And on the other hand, geopolitically, we don't quite seem to be, we meaning all the Bay of Bengal states, don't quite seem to be on the same page. They have a very different attitude towards Chinese presence in the region. India, of course, thinks that Chinese presence is inimical to Indian interests, whereas the other countries, by and large, have no problem with China. In fact, they are more than happy to work with China, to welcome the Belt and Road Initiative. So, in a sense, the geopolitics cuts against, or in some ways undercuts or undermines all of these initiatives in the economic realm. Would you have some sort of comments on that? And I know your report as such is about non-traditional security issues, but would you have a comment on that? My second issue, let me just raise to you before I come to some very interesting questions that it was there. Is there again a tension on the blue economy front between prosperity and sustainability? The fact that the blue economy framework, you talk of ocean economies, was really about inclusive and sustainable growth. But the inclusive and sustainable part somehow doesn't seem to get the importance that growth seems to get. Meaning this is really about extracting resources from the sea. Even Bangladesh, that you have highlighted in your report, and is generally accepted to be one of the most forward-leaning countries in the region on blue economies, seems to really have this impression that this is all about going and mining the sea's resources, be it fishing, be it, you know, deep sea mining, oil and gas, just make, you know, wealth, create wealth from the seas with no regard for the sustainable, you know, ecosystems, biodiversity, etc. And that has resulted in these dead zones that you talk about in your report, and something that you and me had a chance to discuss a couple of days earlier. So would you have a comment on that? And along with that, I'll just raise two other questions that I have received here in my chat box. Let me just come to the first two. So there is this question about the Quad. You know, I mean, there is this whole strategic dimension to security, which of course your report does not quite sort of address. But would you have some thoughts on what, this is a question by Nayan Kanan, who asks how critical is the Quad for the region, and do you think it can be expanded in scope in a way that it can contribute to the security and stability of the space? And the second question is by Himanshu Bajpai, which is in which he asks that will there be implications of China's port building in these countries? 3 have already been made. We know the 3, Gwadar, you know, Colombo, Hambantota, but there's a 4th one in Myanmar that's coming up. And will that have an impact on security in the region? You can take these 4 questions first, and then I'll come to the remaining Qs and Ys.
Okay. So let me kind of address those in reverse order. When it comes to Chinese port development in the region and the Maritime Silk Road, I guess the question is generally what are the kind of security implications of that? My thoughts on that, and what I think we try to represent in the report, is that geopolitical considerations aside, I think every individual state which has the potential to receive port funding and investment as part of the MSR needs to consider individually the potential benefits and the potential risks, of which there are ample on both sides. Much of the port infrastructure in some of the states around the region is in need of significant investment, and there's not necessarily the the capacity to make that investment by the state, and there's not necessarily the business climate that draws in private investment for those kind of high price, long-term investments. So in that respect, it is filling a need. However, there are kind of three big risks that I think every state considering that would need to look pretty strongly at. Those are the financial risk. Lots of large-scale Chinese infrastructure investment overseas simply doesn't have a good record of economic viability. And doing their own independent economic feasibility studies to make sure that this debt that they're taking on is really going to address their most pressing development needs would be quite important. I also think that a lot of the port developments in the region have kind of operated under capacity and haven't reaped the economic benefits that were promised initially. That raises the second risk of, if these do not pan out financially, what's your level of political risk in how could that debt be leveraged for political gain in some fashion? And then the third I would highlight would be transparency concerns. Many of the deals that have been part of the MSR have not necessarily had high levels of transparency, and in some places where recipient states where corruption can sometimes already be an issue, that could exacerbate that. So those would be the three risks I would kind of highlight for any state considering. And that's not unique to the fact that it's Chinese investment. It's the fact that it's any kind of foreign partner putting that investment in. But the risk profiles may be different dependent on who that state making the offer of investment is. I hope that answers the question. Perhaps less of a security angle than was being hoped for, but that would be the way I would probably approach that. When it comes to the Quad, again, the geopolitical role of the Quad is not really the focus of this report. As you mentioned, it is much more focused on non-traditional security issues. However, one of the things that that we've discussed and we think is quite interesting is improving the relationship between donor and recipient states when it comes to maritime security capacity building. And when, the Quad has its geopolitical role, but these are also four states which are very interested in non-traditional maritime security issues within their regions. And they're also four major maritime security assistance providers. So I think with the Quad, an interesting role for the Quad when it comes to non-traditional security issues, both in the Bay of Bengal and in the larger kind of Asia-Pacific region, the Quad could really be a kind of a leading forum for maritime security capacity building, coordination, and deconfliction, making sure that the donor countries are not providing the same kinds of training and equipment to countries that the efforts are being duplicated, and probably much more importantly, really using the Quad as a forum for having donor states or capacity building providing states speak to those recipient states, their security partners, and really use the Quad as a forum for discussing how they can match what they are providing with what is actually most needed by those recipient states. Sometimes there may be cases where the assistance provided for maritime security capacity building is driven by what the perceptions of the donor state. rather than what the actual most pressing capabilities needed by the recipients are. And so in that way, I think the Quad could be an interesting grouping for really starting a dialogue between donors and recipients on how best to, how to make that maritime security capacity building for non-traditional issues most effective. When it comes to, so moving to the sustainability versus blue economic development. Yeah, I think you're right. There's absolutely a tension there. These are finite resources in some cases. Hopefully they're sustainable resources, but when it comes to hydrocarbons and things like that, I think that there always needs to be a balance struck, because there is, if you don't, and one of the things we try and highlight in the report is that if you don't take into full consideration the social and environmental sustainability of blue economic projects, they will not have the welfare outcomes that you're hoping for. For instance, as we mentioned in the report, especially fisheries and coastal tourism, the health of the ecosystem is the most important factor in the future profitability of those industries. When you look at fishing practices, Abhijit, I'll refer to a conversation we had earlier. I think that you brought up the issue of fishing subsidies, and that's something where perhaps fishing subsidies can still play a role in fisheries management policies, but changing them from looking at how do we facilitate the greatest possible catch by our fishermen and provide incentives for that, to how do we provide financial incentives for the most sustainable fishing practices possible by our fishing fleet. So I think there's small adjustments in kind of in maritime economic policy that can be made across a variety of areas to try and strike that balance between growth and sustainability at both a social and an environmental level. And then, I'm sorry, remind me, the tension between geoeconomics and politics. For that one, I may be a bit beyond my breadth. Yes, I'm sure that geopolitical tensions are certainly undermining or impacting the desire for more economic integration. But to be honest, that's a bit beyond my ability for strategic thinking.
Okay, fine. Jay, we'll just take the next set of questions, because I have a lot of participants now posing some very interesting questions. The first one is by Ambassador Manju Seth, and she asks, given China's growing activities in the Bay of Bengal, how can India safeguard its strategic interests in the region and also ensure economic development? So essentially, she's pointing to the fact that does China still remain the big concern as far as India and Bay countries are concerned, and is there some ways in which we can safeguard our strategic interests? Again, I would like to highlight that this report, really, for those who've gone through it, is not really about strategic security, which is why we were keen not to highlight the China dimension or security in the region. This is really about non-traditional security. But Jay, if you have some thoughts on that, there's two other questions that I'll pose in this second round. One's by Commodore Thomas. He's a senior fellow at the IDSA. And he has raised a question. Essentially, his question's about maritime domain awareness. And he says that, we have these radar networks, we have the white shipping agreements, we also have AIS chains. Has this in any ways practically helped in mitigating the challenges that we see in the region? in the sense that we are talking to each other much better. We have a better picture of what's happening at seas. But has this really helped in bring down the levels of crime and illegal activity that we see in the region? His second question, Commodore Thom's second question has to do with the militarization of the region, in which he asks whether, the fact that the Myanmaris, the Thais, the Bangladeshis will all be getting submarines from China, will this have an impact on the broader stability, strategic stability in the region? Again, I would again highlight that this is not really what your report looks at, but if you have any thoughts on that, could you sort of come in? Let me just add one more thing to this, and this could be a sort of comment from someone that's looked at maritime security for many years now. Any bay is a tricky space. And I think the reason it's tricky is that it lies on this cusp between territorial waters and the high seas. And there is always this sense of a sort of ownership that one big country has about the bay. In this case, it happens to be India. The bay is not India's territorial waters. The bay is not an Indian space. But there is almost a sense that India has some sort of special prerogative, a special right in the Bay of Bengal, in terms of influence, etc. And that sometimes can create complications, because there will be many countries in the region who will be looking to external actors to build up their capacity, and capacity building is something you bring up in your report. So in this case, if the region is actually looking at China to build up their capacity and not quite India, what sort of complications does this create? Again, the report does not sort of talk about all of this. I don't think it should, because it's not about all of this. But in case you have some thoughts about this, could you please come in? Thank you all for posing the questions. I will, in the last round, try and fit in all the other questions. But Jay, can you take these 4 or 5 first?
Sure. So the first question there was regarding MDA, some of the technical platforms that have are more frequently utilized in the information sharing frameworks that are currently being used. And I don't know necessarily if we're approaching this from a domestic perspective. We're talking about internal, between agencies within a nation or something like that for information sharing. But I would say that yes, the technical aspects are incredibly important. There's no getting around that. But there's also a variety of other important aspects. One is the ability to, really synthesize and process and analyze that information. The ability to, establish trends from that kind of data and things like that, which I think that most nations which have the ability to do that collection probably largely have the ability to do that kind of analytics. The other 2 things I would highlight is international or regional information sharing. I mentioned previously in my remarks the establishment of the IFC IOR and the role that can play. I think information sharing is particularly important in regions where there is a significant gap in MDA collection capacity, because you may have a very good idea of what's happening within your maritime domain, but if at the limits of your EEZ, your picture kind of goes blank and you have no access to information on the other side, that can be problematic, and especially providing states with less resources and less capacity with some of the information that may be critical to their maritime security needs, I think is beneficial to the collective security of a region like the Bay of Bengal. The other element I would highlight is that particularly in states with less capacity and less resources for those technical collection platforms, another important key to maritime develop, like I said, for states with kind of more limited resources, human intelligence might, to use that term, might also be an important element of information collection. And I don't mean human intelligence in the traditional sense of espionage. I mean human intelligence more along the lines of community policing and things of that nature. So for that, I think two of the big important issues are developing cooperative and productive relationships with civilians at sea and in coastal areas by maritime law enforcement entities. Making sure that coastal communities are part of discussions around policy making for fisheries practices and maritime protected areas and things of that nature. Then the other thing would be making sure that there are clear, easy, and cost-effective reporting platforms for civilians at sea and in coastal areas to use when they may see suspicious activities. One example I would highlight here in the maybe greater Bay of Bengal region is that of Malaysia and the KM3 app, or K3M. I apologize if I may have gotten the acronym wrong. But it's an application that they have provided to seafarers, fishermen, civilians at sea within their maritime space, where they can receive information from maritime law enforcement entities about weather and security risks, things of that nature. And then they can also use it as a direct reporting platform to the Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency. So things of that nature, I think, might be alternative models for the more technical, resource-intensive types of MDA collection that we usually think about.
Okay. Right, Jay. So let me just come to the final round and the final three questions that are being posed. The first one is by Sanjay Jayawardene. He's from the Sri Lanka Coast Guard. And he says that he asks that in a post-COVID era, is capacity going to be limited? Capacity to deal with issues like illicit arms trade, maritime crimes. Although, I mean, your report does not go into the compulsions of the post-COVID era, but he's keen to know about what sort of maritime law enforcement efforts will be be viable in a post-COVID era. The second question is from Amitav Manik. And Amitav Manik is asking a question regarding the potential of human connectivity in the Bay of Bengal. And he says, as we know, Europe is internally connected by road, but do you think there is an opportunity for India to connect the maritime route also to other coastal countries like Bangladesh, Thailand? I mean, yes, of course, your report does go through all of this, but would you have some thoughts on whether sea connectivity would be a cheaper, a more feasible alternative to air connectivity in the region? The third question would be from Sohini Bose from the ORF, the Calcutta chapter, in which she says that the remote islands of the Andaman Nicobar are often used for illegal activities that abound the bay. Does maintaining stability in the bay directly transpire or does translate into better security in the Andaman Nicobar? So this is basically a question about island states and how island states can better benefit from greater capacity building, from greater coordination in the region. The last question would be from Biswaroop Saha. And Biswaroop Saha says, can regional organizations like SAARC and ASEAN play an important role in better positioning India and the region in a way that they can better cooperate in the Bay of Bengal? Does the country have any alternative way of tackling these ongoing problems? So essentially, this is again a question about regional multilateral organizations other than BIMSTEC, other organizations that can contribute to security in the region. Would you think that is again a feasible concept? And after Jay, Commodore AJ, I'd like you to also come in on the militarization question, sir. This was actually really meant for you to sort of get your views on what you think, how you think China's militarization of this space has adversely impacted our equities in the region, and has it also in some ways affected our ability to, better understand the region and to roll out initiatives in the space? But Jay, first you.
Sure. So trying to address the COVID question first. I think we've already seen how drastically COVID can impact the operations of maritime enforcement entities. We've largely seen that in navies, the U.S. Navy and others among them. But the same dynamics that make spread aboard a Navy vessel are equally, I imagine, at play for law enforcement, maritime law enforcement entities. So there's certainly the potential that could kind of impact the enforcement side. But what I think might also be interesting to highlight from the kind of non-traditional security and COVID perspective is that it can also change the face of some of the threats that we face for maritime non-traditional security. I would point those interested to an article written by our director Curtis Bell on one of the major impacts of the kind of economic fallout of COVID is that with such a glut in global oil supply, a lot of our onshore storage has dried up, and you see tankers used as floating storage offshore in ways that they are not normally doing, and this creates a whole host of questions about how do you place those in secure anchorages? Do those become targets for potential maritime terrorism? So I think there's a whole host of ways that this could impact non-traditional maritime security, which we may not even fully understand at this point. Moving to the Bay of Bengal connectivity, I think one of the things I didn't have a particularly time to highlight, but we did try to highlight in the report itself, was that I think one of the key actions of BIMSTEC so far is the master plan for connectivity. I think that is something that has one of the tangible things that's put forward that has a real potential to impact the maritime space in the Bay of Bengal. And I believe that part of that is reference to coastal shipping and the development of coastal shipping between states within the Bay of Bengal. I am not a transportation economist, but I would imagine that there, under certain conditions, there could certainly be cost benefits to the development of that kind of intra-regional shipping as opposed to a reliance on air freight. I'm sorry. So looking then to the SAARC and ASEAN question, I think one of the other things we highlighted in the report is that the Bay of Bengal is in some ways in an odd geostrategic position because it is at the nexus of these kind of two sub-regions. South Asia has traditionally been oriented towards SAARC as its platform for regional cooperation. Myanmar and Thailand and the rest of Southeast Asia have obviously largely been oriented towards ASEAN, and that creates this kind of geostrategic fault line through the Bay, where in either forum you can only have half of the relevant parties discussing kind of Bay of Bengal issues. So that's why I think BIMSTEC is particularly useful there. But that's not to say that SAARC and ASEAN couldn't both have productive roles to play. Another organization I would highlight would be the Indian Ocean Rim Association. They have placed maritime security and safety particularly as high priorities on their agenda and have already implemented a number of programs kind of within across the Indian Ocean region, but also within the Bay of Bengal states more specifically. The potential problem there with IORA in regards to the Bay of Bengal is the non-membership of Myanmar. It's difficult to have kind of a comprehensive conversation about Bay of Bengal maritime security issues when a large portion of your eastern littoral is not included in the conversation. So I think there's a lot of ways for these other organizations to play a productive role. I would simply highlight BIMSTEC as kind of being the most natural fit, but not to the exclusion of other multilateral platforms.
AJ, would you have some thoughts around the militarization thing before I come to Pooja and we'll
very briefly, any military weapon transfer, particularly high-end weapons like submarines or ships or aircraft, have deep strategic underpinnings. They're just not handed over from one country to another without some sort of strategic reason for doing so. And I think the very fact that China has sort of been able to give almost all the countries in our periphery some element of military hardware, particularly naval hardware, whether it's Bangladesh with submarines, Myanmar various equipment, Thailand submarines in the frigate, Sri Lanka a frigate, they're giving Malaysia platforms. Pakistan, of course, we know, but that's anywhere on the western seaboard. So this in itself is a vulnerability that India will have to address one way or another. We'll either have to learn to live with it, because there's very little we can do about it. These countries which are getting military hardware have every right to get military hardware from anywhere they like. It's unfortunate that we were not able to leverage our military industry to be able to provide this to them. I mean, there's no business for Bangladesh to be getting submarines from China. India should have been giving them submarines, but we don't have enough, or we can't build our own. So that's a limitation we have to come to terms with. But I think most dangerous two elements which should cause us concern is any such heavy military equipment gives that country, the donor country, a lot of diplomatic and political leverage in the country it is given it to, and restricts the options that country has to a certain extent. And that is where the vulnerability for India comes up, because in the Bay of Bengal, a permanent Chinese naval presence or Chinese presence is of concern to India. It also limits and inhibits us in controlling the choke points which allow access into the Indian Ocean. If they are also on this side of those choke points, then that inhibits our ability to control that. So I think from a strategic maritime security perspective in the region, the very fact that China is going to be present in terms of having given military hardware to various countries is going to inhibit our strategic options in what should be our strategic space in a way. So that's my take on this.
Right, sir. I'm getting a message from my IT manager who's saying we're well over time. We need to wrap this up. But Pooja, do you have some final thoughts before I sort of bring this to an end?
So, So I agree with AJ sir that military has a huge role to play, but the report is all about non-traditional threats. So I just wanted to keep my comments limited to that. And as I've already mentioned earlier, that Jay's reports show that this region has huge potential in terms of development and how countries can come together to develop this region. So I think instead of keeping both the eyes on China as the elephant in the room and seeing our progress, regional progress from that angle, I think we can keep one eye on the elephant and another eye on the developmental angle and look into the issues that Jay has highlighted in his project and work towards that for regional peace and development. That would be it.
No, thank you. Thank you everyone for this wonderful discussion. Jay, I wish we had more time, but I would again reiterate the point that your report is extremely instructive, from a tactical, non-traditional security point of view. And I was also very happy to see it has some very interesting data, and it actually covers more than just security. There's issues of stability. There's issues of economic prosperity, community building, etc. that the report goes into, and it's very heartening to see that. Hopefully, there will be other events that we will cooperate on and collaborate on in the times to come. But thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the discussants, Commodore AJ and Pooja. Thank you, Panel, if you're there. I'm sorry I couldn't. I would have liked an intervention from you, but thank you for proposing this discussion, and we are very happy that we could do it. And thank you all very much. Until next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.